Welcome to another CRO Wisdom podcast with Kristen Habacht. I think I got that right.
Yeah, you got it.
CRO at Typeform. Kristen occupied various cool positions over the year. Obviously, Typeform is a huge one. I'm a user, and pretty much all the startup founders I know are users. She worked at Zapier, Atlassian, Trello. So these are huge companies, and I think we're in for a treat today. We're going to learn a lot of insights from Kristen, CRO's role at these very cool tech companies. This podcast is brought to you by podbuyer.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast like this one, or if you want to find sponsors for your podcast, you can reach out to my agency. That is podbuyer.com. Kristen, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit more about your role at Typeform?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think you did a good overview. Basically, I've spent my whole career in sales, starting from being an account manager and then becoming an SDR manager. And so I've done a little bit of everything. I've worked at Trello as their first revenue hire, basically scaled that team, running a PLG motion before I think most people really knew what to call it. They just kind of called it sales light, I think. And then we were acquired by Atlassian, and I spent 4 years there, which was great. They had IPO'd a little bit before we had been acquired. And so we were still there through quite a bit of hyper growth. And the unique thing with Atlassian is that they didn't really have much of a sales team when I joined. And so it was really exciting to be a part of that as they grew it. And then I think you mentioned I didn't work at Zapier, but I did do advising work for them. So I had known the team there from back in the Trello days. And so when they started to want to build out a sales team, I partnered with them and helped them with some of the experiments that they were going to run and thinking about how to do it in the best possible way. And I've been COO and president at a company called Shogun, led them through their Series C. And then, like you mentioned, most recently at Typeform, where I have the sales, marketing, customer success, support, care, community, all those great teams under me, which is really exciting. And so the best part, I think, of that is in PLG, it's really important, I think, to have a holistic view of the funnel. And so, at least in my experience, it's really important to have both the top of the funnel and marketing and brand and all those elements all the way through the success and support side, and those core parts that also touch the customer journey that sometimes don't get thought about in the revenue lens. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and the experience.
Let's talk first about Trello. So I was a heavy user in these years. I had all of these boards and all of these tickets.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that if I come back to these boards nowadays, it's a mine of gold. It's like I literally used to
Yeah.
take note, and each note would be a ticket. So I'd have like 1,200 notes per little Kanban board, and I had
Yeah.
like 15 of those, and then you multiply that by like 20 of all the projects that I had. So I'll come back to those soon, but I think a lot of people were also heavy users, and the Kanban process was taking traction back in these days. How did you get on Trello's radar, and
Yeah.
how did you evolve that quick from sales manager to VP sales there?
Yeah. So I had worked with the guys who had founded Trello. They had had a startup previous to that, which was a company called Fog Creek, which was for any deep tech fans, they know Fog Bugs that competed with Jira back in the day. Obviously, we sort of know who ended up winning that one, but a lot of really cool companies ended up sort of coming from Fog Creek. So Trello was one, but also Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, if people are familiar with that company. It came from Joel and Michael as well. And so it kind of became a little bit almost of an incubator where they put bright people together and saw what came out of it and then made investments around that. So Stack and Trello came from that. So I had been at Fog Creek. I had left Fog Creek after a couple of years because I was commuting daily to New York City from Connecticut, and it was like a 2-hour train ride each direction. And even though I loved the team, I was like, guys, I can't do this anymore. So when they had spun off Trello, they had actually decided to go remote first, which was really not done yet at the time. And so they said, hey, listen, would you come back? Would you run our sales team for us? Oh, by the way, we don't have a sales team. So you're also the sales team of one, but would you like to figure out how to run a sales team for us? And then you can do it remotely. So I joined as the sales manager of nobody, of myself, and really took the first couple of months to make those calls myself, talk to customers. They had maybe 5 million users at the time, but they weren't really monetizing it at all. And so they said, we have all these support tickets, or people are asking to pay us, and like someone should probably talk to them. So I took a couple of months, took all those calls, figured out what we thought an enterprise package would be for some of these bigger customers, and then started hiring out the team. And by the time we started hiring out the team, that's when I moved into the VP position. So yeah, it was really interesting because we did it in a way that I would say, we didn't have like a data team or a revops team. We didn't have any of those things. It was just a lot of like gut instinct, and the love of the brand was really helpful because people would just like take our calls, like all the things you just said about I used it all the time, and people loved it. And as a salesperson, to call somebody up and be like, can I talk to you about Trello? They'd be like, yes, please. It was so unusual. And so it was just such a great experience and a great brand. And even now, still, like if I'm out wearing my Trello swag, people will come up to me and be like, oh, Trello changed my life or whatever. So it was just a great product to be a part of.
And you said PLG, so obviously it's not up all to the product to do the work. Even the greatest product out there will never sell itself. So the question is, like, what were you selling nowadays? Was it enterprise plans?
Yeah. So what we did is, again, PLG wasn't really a thing, but the narrative from our CEO at the time was, listen, I don't want to take funding if I don't need to take funding. We did this one round. It would be great if we don't have to take any more. And so please build everything in the interest of it being profitable eventually, right? So I didn't have the luxury of saying, let's hire 40 salespeople and just burn, right? So every hire I had to bring on had to pay for itself. So we went really slowly. So the organic place to start was, don't mess with the small accounts that maybe will just buy on their own. It's not going to pay for these people. So we had to go enterprise, but enterprise didn't exist. So we took those first rounds of phone calls and we started to find out what people cared about, which now, by the way, most of this stuff is table stakes. But at the time, you have to remember it was, quite a while ago, not to date myself, but these were still, things that were kind of new to think about. So for example, we were like, what about SSO? And it's like, oh, would people actually pay for SSO? And I was like, yeah, I think they might. So, SSO, custom terms and conditions, consolidated billing. It was, you could talk to me, you could talk to an account manager. And so really it was all stuff that had no product dependency other than the SSO part that we sold, because we didn't quite believe yet that we were going to have traction. So a lot of the early days stuff was that. And there was a lot, again, at the time, of just the power of saying to somebody, you're a big company, you should be on enterprise, you should have a custom contract. People were like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So that was the original product. And then it obviously grew from there. But I think the first feature that was developed was SSO. And it took probably a year before it was in place for us to actually start selling it. So we also sort of sold the promise of, which I never advocate selling ahead of a feature, but we did sort of sell the promise of SSO coming as well.
SSO being a security feature for organizations with large team to make sure that they don't get into cyber hack trouble.
Right, exactly. Yeah, to be able to control your user login. So because Trello was a free product and people could sign up on their own, what you'd find is people would use the company email to create accounts, put sensitive data on it, then they would leave and they couldn't lock that board back down or take that data back in. So SSO gave them the control over that. So for the first, year or so, it really was a security play that we were working.
Because I remember, was it like Trello Gold that was called? I tried it a bunch of times, never saw any benefits to it. And I'm seeing a lot of enterprises or tech startups struggle with their payment plans. Sometimes I go, why am I not paying for this straight up? And that's like a problem for them. And second, most of the time, plan upgrading is not always super useful. Obviously, the enterprise plan has never been aimed aimed toward myself. I'm not a
Right.
big business, and I don't intend to become one on an employee level side of things. So the first question I have regarding these plans is, do most companies make cash on enterprise, or how are the
Yeah.
tiers separated? Because it seems that in Trello's case, it's mostly a freemium pretty much
Yeah.
for everyone. And like 80% of revenue used to come from enterprises with the SSO feature. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, so Trello was a unique one a little bit there, which was Gold was meant for kind of the prosumer, because we had B2C and B2B users. And so the consumer version was Gold, which is mostly just fun kind of pro hacks. And honestly, the bigger aspect for Gold, Trello was trying to build virality. And so we had a thing where if you recommended us to somebody and they signed up, then you got Gold for free. And Gold was just like custom backgrounds and stickers. And it was all fun stuff, like kind of power usery things. But then we actually had 3 paid plans. We had Pro, Business, and then Enterprise. And so I would say most PLG, it usually ends up looking like 80% of the paying customers are on one of those self-serve tiered plans. 20% of them are on enterprise, something roughly like that. But yeah, you're right. The revenue is of course flipped, which is that 20% produces a disproportionate amount of the revenue. It has lower churn. It has higher net revenue retention, gross revenue retention than the other cohort. So yeah, but for Trello, I mean, it took a while, obviously, to build from that, because it really was starting from a PLG place first. Same honestly with Typeform, which is that only in the most recent couple of years have we had an enterprise version. So most of the customer base that was paying, I mean, almost all the customer base at the time, at least, that was paying on one of the self-serve plans.
I remember the Gold features, which was like automations and so forth. That was pretty cool, and the
Yeah.
power-ups. And then I believe you acquired Butler, which was
Yeah.
that automation company. So that was interesting as well. I think it became free. So lots
Yeah.
of experimenting at this company. Then you got acquired by Atlassian.
Yeah.
How did the culture change? Was anything different, or did Zuck style, they let you manage the company as its own entity and did not
Yeah.
intervene too much?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think a little bit of both. So I think one of the benefits of the Atlassian acquisition and the Trello acquisition was that culturally they were actually very similar companies in terms of like, we weren't a giant sales-led first company. So it's not like they acquired something that was so fundamentally different than how they were going to market. And the way we thought about things was pretty similar. Actually, one of the bigger differences was that we were remote first, and they were not. They were very in office heavy culture. And so now, of course, they're one of the leaders in being remote even post COVID. And they did a lot of listening to our team around that, because it was something they were really interested in doing, because they knew that like, the future was going to go there. And so that was one of the bigger, more interesting kind of culture changes. So I would say it was a mix. Product and engineering, those teams stayed pretty independent. They really remained kind of a Trello group. Sales got moved in very quickly. So we actually joined the Atlassian team within the first year, where some of the other teams still to this day run independent. And it was immediately kind of merged together. And so within a year, I took over managing both the Trello sales team and the Atlassian enterprise sales team. So we kind of merged those together and tried to figure out, plays of how to sell the product together or sell to the same customers, to different buyers, whatever it might have been. So yeah, a little bit of both. Some people got to stay Zuck style independent. Some of us merged in a little bit sooner than the rest.
How did the change affect you sales wise? Because you were probably part of a way bigger department.
Yeah.
Did you learn from more experienced folks at Atlassian, and how did you
Yeah.
integrate with their SOPs?
Yeah, all the Trello folks that went through the Atlassian acquisition always talks about like it was kind of like Atlassian University. It was 4 years of the most intense learning I think most of us ever went through. So I mentioned before, right, when we were starting, we were really scrappy and we didn't have the luxury of like a revops team or sales ops or, data or whatever else it was. I was the one going in and making like changes in Salesforce to make a field, required or to build reports or whatever. And so all of a sudden we got merged in and we had all these resources that allowed us to be data driven. We had enablement, like it was me doing enablement before. And so I really learned, I learned a lot specifically around the data driven approach and how they used the data to, just architect the team, goal the team, and form the team. And that is something that I've taken with me kind of everywhere that I've gone since then. So yeah, I think that was the biggest one, but a ton of learnings. I think we also helped them quite a bit. There had been a culture at Atlassian of we don't have sales, we don't need sales. And it was hard for our team coming in to hear this, right? Because here's a bunch of salespeople you just acquired and we just been told like we don't need sales. And they really did a great job. Credit to Jay Simons, who was the president at the time. Mike Cannon-Brooks and I spent time together, and they just came with like the most sincere, like we'd like to learn from you. And so and Jose Morales, who was heading up the field team at the time. And it never felt like we were forced to fall in line with what they were doing. There was always really a sense of like, hey, if this is the guiding principle, which is, human touch in the smartest place that human touch should be applied, how have you guys fit into that? How could we do that? And so I think I'd like to think at least that there was learnings on both sides of it. And, since we joined, not that I give credit to us exclusively, but Atlassian has really grown their sales, their enterprise advocates, their loyalty. That team has just exploded since we had joined. And I'd like to think that we were a part of that journey for them too.
And then Zapier, how did that came about? You had great experience at first, a startup that got acquired by a bigger startup, quote unquote, and then believe it's Alan Wade, right? The CEO of Zapier, or I forgot his name.
Wade, yeah.
Wade, forgot his family name. But anyway, this guy, you got under his radar as an advisor, and then you decided to give them an advisory on GTM. So I guess you had developed a GTM plan as well at Trello and Atlassian. How did that came about?
Yeah, so I met Wade years ago at a conference. They were actually one of the first integrations built for Trello. And I think at the time they were still pretty small. So we had gotten to know each other that way. And then I was looking to leave Atlassian in the next year, and I wanted to start getting some advising and some other experience under my belt. And so I forget through the course of the conversation, but somewhere along the lines, I got connected to their customer success leader. I think maybe Wade introduced us. And she was starting to run some experiments about self-serve assist, some upsell motion potentially on the customer success side. At the time, everything still had to be on credit card. They weren't doing any billing. They weren't doing any custom terms and conditions. They weren't doing anything like that, but they were getting requests obviously for that. And they were trying very much like Atlassian, I think, to say, hey, the spirit of what we built is this thing. But we know we're losing something over here. How do we merge those two things without losing the spirit of who we are? So, they had a business operations guy who was basically kind of running it as a strike team experiment. And I partnered with him. I think we probably worked together for about a year, talking, at first it was like every week, and then we would stand something up and say, all right, let's talk now every 2 weeks, and then let's talk every month and check the progress of these things. And through the course of it, they basically stood up a couple of new motions for themselves. And it was really great to watch that, because it was my first time not as an operator really advising something and saying like, hey, listen, here's best practices I've seen. Watching a really talented team go and take that and put it into practice, and then come back and say, hey, this is what we learned, this we didn't learn. And me saying, okay, yeah, that's what I've seen too. And here we pivot again. So it was a great experience, and it was a good segue for me to say, hey, I really like doing this. And so that was where I started to say, let me go explore maybe picking up some board seats or some other advising seats as well, so that I could both put into play more of what I've seen, but also see more stuff. Because when you're an operator, you're very focus on just the thing you're in charge of every day, day in and day out. Maybe you go to a conference, but generally you don't see what's working, what's not working for other people at scale. And so stepping into board and advising seats, I started to realize like, there's a lot of commonality on what works and what doesn't work, but then also people break through sometimes in a way that you wouldn't expect them to. And you can take that and try and apply it to what you're doing as well.
So what were the top GTM strategies for Trello? Because I saw lots of remarketing from Trello and obviously product hunt, and well, that's more like marketing department, but from a sales perspective, yes, I was assigned most probably an account manager, never really got follow-up. So what were the GTM tactics at play here?
Yeah, you probably weren't assigned an account manager is my guess, because we only worked with, we only put sales or customer success against any account that had at least 100 users from the same domain, even if they didn't know each other, right? So the first one was kind of looking at a domain roll-up strategy. So in theory, somebody could be a huge power user, but if they're just one person, we wouldn't reach out. And then we started to iterate from there. So marketing was really exclusively brand and content focused, right? They were just out there trying to create awareness and those elements. And then, so that meant that the sales team wasn't really getting MQLs. We weren't getting anything like that. So we used product exclusively for our lead qualification. So again, before it really had a name, we basically, I don't know if we pioneered it, but we were one of the first teams probably really using product qualified leads. And so we would look and say, okay, do they have this many users? Are X amount of those users in the same team together? Because there was teams in Trello. Are they using any integrations that are indicative of enterprise usage? For example, Salesforce, right? Salesforce would be indicative of enterprise usage. Google Docs, not as much. So we would look at things like that, and we would basically score them and put them out to the sales team to follow up to. And then there would be people who were not enterprise qualified who would reach out and have questions. And we ended up developing kind of like a junior AE or like a SDR-ish team for that group that basically answered the questions, but then pointed them back to self-serve. So it was transactional, very similar to what Atlassian's like customer advocates are today versus their enterprise advocates. So yeah, most of the go-to-market motion was really focused around that, which was product qualified leads, outbound to our existing customer base. We didn't do any outbound. And then land and expand. We had a large large for our size account management team that basically once you signed an enterprise deal, you transition to those folks and they ran a commercial motion to expand the customer's usage.
Then you became an LP at Forum Venture. There was Shogun in between, and co-found partners as well. Write your thesis of getting more bits of data and input so that you can A/B test them in your own businesses. So nowadays, like, how do you go with that model? Do you think a podcast could also help for you to like quiz a bunch of GTM folks, ask them about their playbooks, and then how do you go with implementing these experiments on your GTM roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I like to be a sponge of knowledge as much as I can, but I also recognize there's only so many hours in the day. And so the nice thing, advising and boards take up a good bit of time, not as much as being an operator. Being an LP is really very, I don't do anything for the most part other than I've given money. But the nice thing is that you get updates, you see what's going on. So again, like you get a good bit of information without having to spend as much time on it. So I think it gives me little glimpses into what's working and what not working for me to kind of take that into play. There's always stuff coming up. I mean, people are, especially like think about AI right now. This is something none of us were talking about, a year ago. And now I'm talking to my marketing team constantly of like, how do we leverage this for more? We've just implemented an AI lead scoring tool to basically take our PQL and MQL, to sort of the next level of being able to make sure we're getting as best as possible. And so I think it's such a fast moving space. And one of the tools that we invested in, or we've purchased, happens to be a tool that is in my LP network as well, which is how I found them. So it's also not just like learning, but it's also seeing the trends of where the investors are going and where businesses are going, and seeing how we can leverage that as much as possible. And I think that fits really nicely into a PLG world, because again, everything comes back to like running a go-to-market motion that's as efficient as possible, which is very of the moment right now with the funding environment change, but that wasn't necessarily the case even 2 years ago, right? So yeah, I think I've learned a lot from getting all those different exposures, and whether it's experiments or finding innovative tech to leverage, it helps me with all those pieces. I love to do a podcast. I did one briefly with 2 other Trello folks that we didn't interview folks, but we talked about our experience scaling the brand early days, and it was a lot of fun, but everyone's lives got busy.
Right.
People stopped having time.
Talking about busy one time now, so I just want to know your goals for this year, your top 3 goals with Typeform.
Yeah, I mean, my top 3 goals with Typeform is, I mean, I would say continuing to innovate on the motion for our team as much as possible. So leveraging cutting edge technology as best we can. I would say we continue to push up market and building out our enterprise sales team, if anyone is looking for a job. And also, you know, pushing to be as data driven as possible and building out, you know, a revops, top of line revops team for us, and using the data as much as we possibly can. So it should be a really exciting year. I'm 6 months in now, and I feel like 6 months is right around where you start being like, you've gone through the, I know everything, I know nothing. Now to be like, what's going on again? And so I'm feeling good about the opportunity ahead of us.
Kristen, thank you so much. Where can
Thanks.
people find out more about you?
They can check out my LinkedIn. They can check out my Twitter, though I don't, or whatever it is now, X, though I don't think I've posted much there recently. But yeah, and feel free to reach out if there's any questions. I'm always happy to chat with folks.
And I'm Charles Cormier, host. That is Another Wisdom Podcast. If you want to find us on LinkedIn or on YouTube.